Defer and Patrick Newman, the AntiWar Renegades. George Wright, it's great to talk to us all. Yay, George!
This is a very solemn time. I know why all of us are here. We want to try to communicate together, show solidarity for the Palestinian people that are going on, the violence and brutality and genocide that's going on in Gaza at the moment. So I feel quite honored to be asked to speak. I know there are a lot of people in this room that have strong opinions and a lot of insight. So we will have a question and answer period afterwards, and which gives people a chance to make their statements as well as ask questions. I'm an expert, but I'm not an expert in the sense that I know a lot, but there's a lot that I don't know, and I'm trying to learn as much as I can. Just a little bit of background about me professionally. For those who don't know me, I taught political science and international politics at Chico State for 36 years. Although I've been retired since about 2003, I got lucky to teach another 8 years at a community college in San Francisco. I mainly taught U.S. politics courses centering around American foreign policy and courses dealing with the third world. I had a course I taught for many, many years, the politics of the third world, and as early as 1972, we had a unit on Palestine and Israel. So I've been following this topic for a long time as an academic. I also have a PhD from the University of Leeds in England in the Department of Politics, and my dissertation was a case study of U.S. foreign policy during the Carter administration and how foreign policy is made. Some of the things I might say today have bearing on that kind of research. Also, I've written a couple books, including a book on the history of U.S. foreign policy towards Angola between 1945 and 1996, I guess it was. And I'm currently working on a book entitled Carter, Afghanistan, and the Making of the Second Cold War, which is a discussion dealing with how the Carter administration, particularly Zabriskie as National Security Advisor, took steps to try to provoke or induce the Soviet Union to go into Afghanistan in 1979. And as you all know, that did happen. And much of the world's geopolitics since, on all levels, was influenced and shaped very strongly by that development. If it sounds like it has some similarity to the United States provoking Russia to intervene into Ukraine, that's not a coincidence, okay? And so this is the kind of stuff that I'm thinking about. I guess the next point I want to make is that I've been working very diligently the last couple of weeks trying to put together a lecture or presentation that provides some history as well as current events, and also my concern about the human condition here. And to be very candid, I've put together maybe two lectures already. And this morning I woke up and I said, no, I'm not going to present these two lectures. I'm going to make another lecture up, okay? So what I'm going to present to you today are some thoughts that I put down this morning during the day, and also consulting with one of my colleagues here, John Howlett. I think the overall theme of this discussion has to do with the geopolitical ramifications of the events that are going on in Palestine, Israel at the moment. And I think the first point I want to make, as a historian, I'm just amazed sometimes when one event happens in history and it just kind of creates this catalytic development or process to where the world changes almost overnight. And certainly the events of October 7th would be a clear example of that. We could go back in history and see a number of events like that. Certainly the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand back in 1914 was an explosive event. Perhaps Pearl Harbor would be on the list. The false narrative about the Gulf of Tonkin situation back in 1964 would be another example, and certainly 9/11 is another example of how a singular event more or less kind of exposes social processes, historical processes that were already there, and oftentimes on the surface or even latent, and all of a sudden they come to the surface and the world changes. There's no question that October 7th has changed the world dramatically, and I hope to try to lay out some of the ideas I have as to why that's been the case. I don't like to identify with any US president, and I certainly don't like to identify with President Biden, but I do agree with him on one point, and that is that he said that October 7th was an inflection point. The only problem there is we have different interpretations of why it was an inflection point. There may be 3 or 4 areas that I want to talk about, and I'm long-winded, but we'll try to go through this as quickly as possible so we can have some Q&A and some discussion. I'm very concerned about geopolitics and historical patterns and contours and the like. And what I see right now is an interesting configuration that's been exposed. If you have in the center Israel and Palestine and Gaza, above that what we have is what you could refer to as a United States, UK, EU, Israeli political configuration. And we can see that very clearly related to the complicity that the United States, UK, Europe, with a strong emphasis on Germany, has with Israel at this point in time. And obviously it's that coalition, and in the United States probably articulated best by the neoconservatives, that have basically been responsible for US foreign policy since the end of the Cold War, and certainly responsible for everything that's happened since 2001 and 9/11, whether it's related to Russia or whether it's related to the Middle East. On the other side of the coin, or on the other side of the Israeli-Palestinian situation, we are witnessing the events that are happening in what one could call the global civil society. And maybe another way of defining it is the masses of the world have risen up in the last couple of weeks in, I think, historical terms. I'm obviously a child of the anti-Vietnam War movement back in the 60s and participated in a number of protest marches and rallies. I've never seen anything like what we're watching right now in the global civil society. The size of these demonstrations, the universality of it, they're happening in the United States, they're happening in Europe, they're happening in Asia, they're happening in Africa, and they're happening in the Middle East, okay? Which we'll find out is significantly important to what we want to talk about. what's also very important is the composition of these protests. And what stands out and is very important to mention, there's a large number of anti-Zionist Jews that are participating in these protests, probably best personified by the some 1,000 people that were at Grand Central Station earlier during the week, wearing black t-shirts saying that not in our name. And if we're looking for hope, which we're always trying to do, for me, that is a clear example of hope. And I want to stay as close to that as I possibly can. What we can, let's see if I have, yeah, and also the persistence of these movements. There, you know, at times in the past, there'll be a weekend and, 50,000 people will show up and that's about it. This is happening every week and almost daily in some situations. And in countries like Germany, which has made it illegal to protest against the Israeli genocide in Gaza. Yesterday, there were thousands of people in Frankfurt, and Dusseldorf, and Berlin. And just to have a plug, I just spent a month in Berlin and have a lot of friends that were in those demonstrations yesterday. And I feel an enormous amount of solidarity with them as well, because the possibilities of them being arrested are very, very great. In fact, I have a friend who has been arrested for protesting in Berlin related to this issue. So I think that's something I want to take note of. So what we want to focus on again is this dynamic that we're talking about here related to this power configuration. One could call it an imperialist configuration, to be very candid with you. And I'm prepared to argue my case there at some point. I think the next point we want to make is what are the immediate political implications of the events that are going on in Gaza and Palestine and Israel at the present moment. I do want to qualify this by saying that I have great personal sympathy for any civilian person being killed, okay? There's no question in my mind about that. So what we want is to create a situation where people are safe and secure and have a sense of justice to their cause, which I personally think is the basis of my politics. In saying that, I think there are about 6 or 7 points that stand out to me. There may be others, you may have additional ones to add, that are very significant at the moment. I think the first is, regardless of how one views Hamas's attack in Israel on October 7th, and there's a number of different interpretations one could have of that attack. What I think we can say is that dramatically that attack has shifted the agenda, where up until October 7th, the powers that be, Israel, and perhaps even the PA, the Palestinian Authority, and certainly the conservative monarchy regimes in the Middle East, had given up on the Palestinian cause. It was non-existent. And in fact, what we're going to show is that since 2020, there's been a process of normalization in the Middle East among many of these regimes, United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Oman, even Sudan, as well as Morocco, establishing normalization relations with Israel at the expense of the Palestinian cause. And even moments before October 7th happened, the process of negotiations being carried out by the Biden administration between Israel and Saudi Arabia was on a fast track for normalization. Owing to October 7th, all of that no longer exists, okay? The Palestinian issue has recentered itself in the world's politics, and the world will not be the same again. So that's the first point I want to make. The second point is that the Israeli narrative of being militarily invincible has been shattered because of this event. And I would argue that part of the venom of the revenge being carried out by the Israeli government is to try to it's being angered by that embarrassment, if you will. And they're attempting, as part of this project, to reestablish that fear and intimidation that it had prior to October 7th. That narrative no longer holds among large masses of people in the civil society. And what we're going to find out is some of our political leaders, whether they like it or not, are beginning to recognize how people are feeling about this event. I think that the second part of that is that related to the events starting October 8th, is that the Israeli narrative of fighting against terrorism, Hamas uses human shields. It's okay to bomb civilian targets because Hamas's tunnels are below hospitals and mosques, et cetera, et cetera. That narrative is dismissed by most people of reason in the world. And so I think that is a very significant development. I want to also add that that this idea that the events of October 7th were unprovoked, there was no context, has also been demolished as well. Now, just to broaden this discussion, the initial topic I was going to talk about was the United States at war, Ukraine and Gaza. We're not going to talk about Ukraine tonight, but clearly that's the same thing that the US did related to the Russians going into Ukraine. It's an unprovoked act when you can show that there is a long, deep contextual history that created the conditions for that. So clearly this mantra of this event was unprovoked. The UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, gave a speech recently where he said these events did not happen in a vacuum. Obviously, Israel's officials called for his resignation from the UN, but the man was simply telling the truth about these events. That's number 3. Number 4, and perhaps this comes closest to home, is that the events since October 7th have exposed the hypocrisy of the United States foreign policy. This is a country that's been going around provoking and carrying out wars, color revolutions, regime change, destabilization, economic sanctions against countries. And if you begin adding up the total of people injured or killed, at least just since 2001, safely over 4 million people in the Middle East, most of them civilians, almost all of them civilians, most of them women and children and the elderly, have been killed by the United States. But at the same time, the US goes around saying that it is the champion of democracy, it is a champion of human rights, and it believes in a rules-based international order. Now that applies to Russia when it responds to the provocations it faced, but it doesn't respond to Israel when it carries out genocide. The world sees this, okay? And many people already were aware of it, but it's crystal clear now. who's going to follow, who in the third world or the global south or in Europe are going to support a US military project against another targeted regime under the guise of defending human rights or defending democracy. That mantra is out the door, no longer, okay? Which, as the old adage says, the emperor has no clothes any longer. I've personally felt the emperor didn't have any clothes starting back in the Vietnam War, but it's taken a long time for people to come to that recognition. What it's also done is it's exposed the complicity that the United States has had with Israel, at least since 1967, and I would argue before that. And it shows that the US is directly in complicity with the genocide Israel is carrying out. But I want to add to it, it's not only complicity, the US is participating in this genocide on a range of levels, obviously giving Israel cover diplomatically, ideologically, providing weapons. I read an article on Consortium News the other day where this satellite surveillance unit in near Alice Springs, Australia, is being used by Israel to surveil the Gaza Strip. And most of the operatives, not most of them, but at least 100 and some operatives of the 800 people working at this satellite surveillance facility are US citizens, US military and civilian personnel. So that's what's happening. And also on a bigger level, because I'm always concerned about the big picture, and we're not going to spend a lot of time explaining this at this moment, but if one looks at geopolitics, the US has been in relative decline over the last 15, 20 years, maybe more. And what we're seeing is the ascendancy of China and Russia moving from a unipolar world order to a multipolar world order. And part of that decline has to do with the decline of the legitimacy of the United States as the hegemon, as the indispensable nation, as the exceptional nation, as the champion of democracy, human rights, and a rules-based order. That legitimacy has speeded up an already rapidly declining hegemony. I don't know how long it's going to take and exactly where it's heading, but we can definitely spot the events that are going on. The next point, I think, is really important to the events in the Middle East, and that is that October 7th has put the onus on the pro-Western conservative, some could call them reactionary regimes in the Middle East, in the Arab world. Obviously, United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Oman, Qatar, who's played kind of a straddled both wings in this story, so they're not quite the same as the other countries. Certainly Jordan, and also Egypt in particular. The onus is on them now. Those are the countries that have either pursued normalization and signed up with a normalization pact with Israel at the expense of the Palestinian issue. And the other would be obviously Saudi Arabia, which was in the process of this normalization process. Now, they are frightened to death of their domestic populations, okay? They are frightened to death of their domestic populations. The so-called Arab Street, okay? Because the Arab Street supports the Palestinians. The Arab Street has always supported the Palestinian cause. But most of the Arab Street has been under the thumb, if you will, or the fist of these regimes. This has changed the dynamic in these Arab countries quite dramatically. What they are aware of is that they could be overthrown. It's not just a matter of policy, it's a matter of them recognizing this hatred of what's going on in Gaza could actually create an implosion, an explosion that could endanger their regimes. So it's not by accident that when I don't even know if I want to give him any respect, when Secretary of State Blinken met in Amman, Jordan yesterday with the foreign ministers of Egypt and Jordan and maybe others, it's not by accident. As the New York Times reported this morning, or actually yesterday, that when Jordan's foreign minister, Amman Safadi, and this is quoting the New York Times, he bluntly told Mr. Blinken, "Stop the madness!" exclamation point. That wasn't because he necessarily cares about Palestinian people, because he cares about his regime's ass, okay? You guys understand what I'm talking about? Okay, this is serious business, folks, okay? Now, to quote the New York Times, the newspaper of record, Arab leaders told Mr. Blinken that they could no longer bear domestic pressure over the high Palestinian death toll and need the Americans to act, quote unquote. It's not by accident that this pathetic human being, Blinken, is now talking about humanitarian pauses, okay? How do you, I mean, what's a humanitarian pause in the middle of a genocide, okay? What is to give some people water and food so they can be murdered the next day? Okay, but they've gotten the message, folks. They've gotten the message, okay? But they're in a steel trap that is, they might not be able to get out of. The next point I want to make, and I wrote an article in the Enterprise Record, I wrote a letter making this point the other day, and I just went to a reunion of some of my old track and field buddies from the 60s, and one of the guys came up to me and said, you won't be able to write letters to the Enterprise Record anymore. They changed their editorial policy, okay? I'm not quite sure where he was coming from, okay? But what we can say is that, to me, of all the things I've said, I can guarantee this is true, is that Biden and the Democrats are committing political suicide.
Yes.
They are committing political suicide. Okay? They already know it, but they don't know how to deal with it, okay? There is no way that Arab Americans, Palestinian Americans, progressive social justice advocates, progressive Jews, African Americans, Hispanics, they're not gonna vote for the Democrats next year, okay? Because of this. We cannot forget it. We don't care how bad Trump is, okay? And what we're learning anyway, we get Trump and we get fascism. With Biden, we get friendly fascism in World War III, okay? So there's no choice anyway, okay? You guys understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
There's no choice anyway. So the Democrats are committing political suicide. Okay? This explains Blinken's pathetic call for a humanitarian pause. This is trying to say, well, we're trying to do something. Well, we already saw what you did, okay? We saw what Biden said. We saw Biden go to sit at Netanyahu's knee, okay? We saw the 14 billion, okay? You understand what I mean? You can't roll that back, okay? You can't, we heard Biden say, well, we can't trust the Ministry of Health's statistics related to how many people are dying in Gaza. We heard that. So this is, to me, what on the home front is very, very significant. Now, I'm going to add a couple things as little sidebars to all this. You know this mantra about Israel has the right to defend itself? First of all, when has an oppressor, an occupying oppressor, had the right to attack the oppressed? Okay? There's something cockeyed, and certainly international law does not allow that to happen, okay? Although there's really no agency to enforce this. Certainly the International Court of Justice is not prepared to do this at this point. But the other point we want to make is, why is Biden talking about that? Well, it's the mantra that has been used for decades now. But here's something that I just picked up the other night listening to a YouTube interview with Professor Khalidi, who is in the Edward Said Chair at Columbia University, is they have to say that because under US law, arms transfers to another country can only occur if they're being used for defense, okay? And if it comes out that there is a case against Israel with the United States as a party to that case, and it's concluded that this is not defense, this is offense, Biden, Blinken, and all those jokers are liable to that. You guys understand what I'm saying? So this is also very, very important to check out, okay? Now, whatever I know, I'm picking, it's not all my ideas, I'm just taking this from other people, by the way. Okay, now, the next area to discuss is there a way to solve this problem? This is the $64,000 question, okay? And I can only give you some of the ideas I have. All of you have views, I think. I think there's three things that stand up in my mind when I pose this question. There could be others. The first is, I would be politically naive to think that any state that has experienced an attack against that state would not respond with violence, okay? There's no debate there. You guys understand what I'm saying? And certainly the level of revenge is understandable, okay? For whatever set of reasons that revenge is being implemented. But what is also very important is understanding the implications of that violence, okay? When one carries that violence out. We've already gone through this in our own country, and that is 9/11 and the implications of what's happened, the Patriot Act, right on down the line, okay? Besides how many wars, how many people were killed in the name of 9/11, okay? What are the costs? We've been through this before on that level. This is maybe in a different scale or different context, but the patterns, the templates are exactly the same, okay? What are the costs? What we can say categorically, that violence does not end violence. It does not end the cycle of violence. Israel can eliminate every single Hamas militant in the Gaza Strip, and that does not change the equation. The issue is not Hamas.
Right.
Hamas is only the most recent iteration of the Palestinian struggle, okay? There will be another iteration at another point. The children are suffering the traumas of these attacks will be the militants of whatever will come next. It may be next month, it may be 5 years, it may be 20 years. But as long as this dynamic exists, it will continue. The second point is, this isn't just about Palestinians. This is about Israelis. If they're insecure, it doesn't seem to me continuing this cycle is going to create security for them, okay? In fact, just the opposite. But in fact, if you have a garrison state, maybe you want this cycle of violence, okay? But that's just a speculation on my part. I'm not saying that's the case. So I think that's a really, really important point to consider in trying to find a solution. The cycle of violence will never end if the cycle of violence continues, okay? So you're trapped in this rabbit hole, if you will. The second point related to how to deal with this, and this is where I may be touching on some people's toes. In spite of every nation, every peoples have mythologies about their creation myths, their founding myths, okay? Those founding myths are based on truth, exaggeration of truth, and fantasy, okay? And over a period of time, it's oftentimes very difficult to determine how much of it is real and how much of it is created. So in keeping that in mind, Israel has founding myths, okay, in its creation. Some of those myths are real, some of those myths are exaggerations, and some of those are false, okay? Part of the rationale of Israel is the Holocaust is used as a justification, okay? And I, as an African American, I'm going to be very candid. I never forget the terror and suffering that the many, many generations that I'm a product of have gone through, whether it's the Middle Passage, where some 8 to 10 million people died en route from Africa to the Americas, or slavery, and I can document my family at least to 1850s, 1860s in Mississippi, okay? So I never forget that, okay? And the world I live in provides a particular reference. And so I can, I've read Norman Finkelstein's the Holocaust Industry, so I have a particular critique of it, but I can understand the importance of that in people's psychology if they want to bring it to the forefront, or wherever it fits. But what we want to stress is, in spite of that superstructure, if you will, that all societies use, Israel has its own. What we have to, in paring that away, we have to understand, we have to be honest with ourselves. What Israel is underneath all of that. It is a white settler colony, and the Palestinians are the indigenous people. They are the Native Americans, okay? That's the simplest formulation one can make about this if one wants to be honest about the situation. We know the histories of white settler colonies. This is a white settler colony, okay? Australia is a white settler colony. New Zealand is a white settler colony. South Africa, we're going to make some comments about South Africa and how to make a solution and amendment. They're all white settler colonies. Now, there's significant differences in each one of those experiences, but there's some patterns that are very similar. And what are the patterns? The dispossession of the land owned by the indigenous population. That is the central thing. The second is creating a rationale to dispossess that. And that rationale tends to be a racist rationale. The people are uncivilized, or they're inferior, or whatever the rationale is. That's whether it was South Africa or whether it was Australia, New Zealand, United States, or I want to argue Israel. This third thing is the pattern of dispossession also includes genocide and also incarceration, whether it's a reservation in the United States, whether it's a Bantustan in South Africa, or whether it's Gaza in Palestine, Israel, okay? Now, you may disagree with that, but I guarantee you Palestinians see that as the framework of their existence. And people who are increasingly supporting the Palestinians, they're not anti-Jewish, they're anti-Israel, carrying out genocide against the Palestinians. And there is no way to solve this crisis until there is an honest reckoning with what Israel truly is, okay? And it's as simple as that, and the violence will continue until that happens, okay? Now, I want to also add that even the Bantustans in South Africa were better than Gaza, okay? Because people could leave the Bantustans and go to work and bring an income home, okay? Just on that level. Now, there's the third point. I gotta find my notes here. See if I jumped ahead here. Give me a second, please. Okay, this is the last point we want to make in this section. I listened to Hassan Nasrullah's talk, the General Secretary of Hezbollah the other day, hour and 21-minute talk. How many listened to that talk? Okay, I think it's very important that you do, okay? It clarifies a lot of things as to where we are at this particular moment. But one of the things that Nasrullah stated is that he holds, Hezbollah holds the United States responsible for this. And I concur with that, because this would not, this project, not since October 7th, but at least since 1967, and in real terms, going all the way back to the 1940s, early, even before 1948, the United States has been an enabler and a facilitator of this project. Before that, up until 1937, it was Great Britain. And the United States could have an enormous amount of leverage to stop this. That's why I say Blinken is pathetic, going around trying to beg Netanyahu to end this, okay? All they have to do is cut the money off. Just cut the fucking money off, okay? And cut the arms off. That's all you have to do, okay? What's the problem with that, okay? Okay, I think I've made my point, okay? Now, the final observation here is that the United States, keep in mind, this is in the context of a big picture. This is just one story, one development in a much larger story, historical story. Let me back off for a minute and try to explain what I mean. If you look at the history of the world, into the capitalist world system, the interstate world system, it started in 1492, okay? It is a specific world system, and what makes it specific, it is a global world system. Throughout history, at least since the beginnings of city-states 10,000, 12,000 years ago, we've had many world systems, okay? The Roman Empire was a world system, but those systems were limited, related to the known world and their economic capabilities, as well as their military capabilities. we're living in the first global world system. And when you examine that world system, you can see patterns that repeat themselves constantly, okay? And the most dramatic pattern that I see is that there is, at a given historical point, a hegemon, a dominant power that is powerful because it has the most advanced economy, it has the most powerful military, it has the dominant currency of the realm, if you will, and it also has the moral high ground, or at least it claims it has the moral high ground, okay? And what happens is that system is able to be benefited by the ability to exploit the periphery, the hinterland. But to do that, they have to create a military outreach, okay? And as they create their military outreach, they forget to reinvest in the domestic plant that gave it the hegemony in the first place, okay? And as that process is happening, another country comes along and comes up with new technologies, steals ideas from other sources, has brain drains from other countries, and it develops an advanced economy, and it becomes a competitor state, okay? Sometimes there's one, occasionally there are more than one. And what then occurs is a fault line, and along that fault line are competition, economic competition, political competition, ideological competition, and certainly, and at a point there begins to be rivalry between the two, and those rivalries have sparks, and occasionally there's peripheral wars. And at a given point, that peripheral war and one event, the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand, it sparks into a global world war, okay? And we can see these patterns. The Portuguese, the Spanish, and then the French and the English fought 9 wars from 1702 to 1815. Two of those wars were the so-called French and Indian War. And the other one was the American Revolution, okay? But the wars were over control of the world to become a dominant hegemon. 1815, Britain defeats France, and it is now the dominant hegemon during the 19th century, Pax Britannica. But by 1870s, what happens? The United States industrializes, Germany industrializes, Japan industrializes, Northern Italy industrializes, parts of Russia industrializes, and we enter a period of inter-imperial competition, rivalry, and during this 65-year period, or 70-year period, by 1945, we have 2 major world wars. I personally believe it was only one. It was 2 episodes of the same war. But by 1945, the US comes out as the hegemon over the world, and it creates structures domestically, national security state, a strategic doctrine based on open door and anti-communism, and these are codified in various strategic documents, etc. And then it creates international institutions, Bretton Woods, IMF, World Bank, et cetera, United Nations, NATO, all these different kind of structures to maintain its hegemony. But for the reasons I just said, the relative decline because of the collapse of its industrial plant, people, I'm going to tell you guys a personal vignette here. I just spent 3 months in Europe, and I traveled all over Europe, and I rode a lot of taxi cabs. And in fact, the minute I got off the plane in London, I got on this taxi. And the taxi driver heard that I was obviously an American. And you know what the first thing he said? "What's wrong with your country?" I had at least 8 taxi cab drivers from London to Budapest asked me that question, okay? And since I'm being driven somewhere, it's only gonna be 10 minutes or 15 minutes. I had to distill it very quickly, okay? And so I just said two things. One, in the early 70s, the country deindustrialized, okay? It deindustrialized. That which means unions are gone, a working class, middle class is gone, etc. Okay? And the second thing, because of that, it restructured the political configuration of the two parties, okay? Particularly their electoral coalition. The Democratic Party had African Americans, and it had unions, and liberal people, etc. And the Republicans had Main Street, Chamber of Commerce, moderates. Many Republicans were in favor of civil rights, etc. But as it shifted, the Democratic Party moved away from defending the working class because there was no unions to benefit them anymore, leading to Hillary Clinton saying in 2016, the Trump supporters are deplorables, okay? Well, those are the fucking working class, okay? Okay, that you should have been trying to cater to. You would have won the election. It wasn't the Russians that meddled. It was your campaign that lost your election. Come on, let's be honest about this. Okay? Now, what did the Republicans do? They shifted to beginning to be an all-white party that was a racist right-wing party. And obviously they create the seedbed for a demagogue, narcissist, genius, Trump to come along and take advantage of it. And we're in one hell of a mess right now because of it, okay? But that's part of the decay or the decline of empire. You can't look at it as something separate, okay? Now you guys understand what I'm saying. Starting in sometime 2001, 2009, 2013, 2017, what you begin to see is the rise of China and Russia, and then other countries linked to those countries through the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, through BRICS, now BRICS II, the Eurasian, the Asian Infrastructure Development Bank, the Belt and Road Initiative, all kinds of counter-hegemonic structures to challenge all those structures that the US put into place, okay? And so we're at that fault line right now. So as this declines and there's this new world order develops, but you have to quote Gramsci here. What did Gramsci say? The new has not been born yet, but the old is not dead. And because of that, there's still going to be morbid symptoms, okay? And we're living in a period of morbid symptoms, okay? And what's happening in Israel and all over are examples of that. Now, I'm not I don't read tea leaves, okay? I consider myself a scientist. But I think that's a pretty apt metaphor to understand the conditions we have. Now, that allows me to make my final observation here, and that is that the United States is facing a come to Jesus moment right now, okay? And that it either changes its stripes quickly or it becomes a pariah state throughout the entire world, okay? And I think the odds are it becoming a pariah state are a lot closer than it becoming it changing its stripes. And the only element of sanity here is Blinken walking around saying, we want humanitarian pauses, okay? But that's about as far as they can go at this point. Yeah. Now, I'm going to finish this up. I hope I covered everything. I'm going to finish this up with, I think, a very important assessment, okay? This is not a new thought to me. In fact, I actually wrote a graduate school paper on this in the 70s, and that was comparing Israel/Palestine with South Africa, okay? This is not a new formulation for me, okay? And to be honest with you, I haven't studied South Africa in a while, but I used to know an awful lot about South Africa. This morning I was just thinking, maybe I should make some comments. If you want to define, I'm thinking, I have another set of ideas, but I'll just take one idea. I think it's safe, no, it's not safe to say, it's accurate to say, Israel is a one-state state, but it's an apartheid state, okay? It's as simple as that, okay? So there's an analogy with South Africa under the apartheid regime. Keep in mind that the South Africans got their ideas from the United States and Jim Crow segregation, and the Israelis got their ideas from apartheid. Okay, you understand? There's like kind of settler colonies kind of are brothers and sisters in all of this. Okay, they adopt ideas that are useful. Okay, now I start thinking today, maybe I should make some points about how to dismantle an apartheid state. And so I started thinking, what were the 5 key steps related to the collapse or dismantlement of apartheid in South Africa? And do those steps jive with the reality of Israel today? And let's go through those steps. First of all, you have to have mass demonstrations, militancy, and strikes by labor unions and organizations. Soweto in 1976, the mine workers, and the protests that were persistent from the middle 70s into the middle 80s, almost on a daily basis. Simultaneously, massive military and police repression and violence against the demonstrators. Black people being killed in the streets, children being shot in Soweto, et cetera, et cetera. These images were being presented all around the world. We didn't have social media and YouTube in those days, but we saw these images and they were everywhere. So that creates a certain milieu, okay? It also kind of explains maybe where Hamas jumped out of that prison on October 7th. They're forgetting us. We're going to do something for them to remember who we are, okay? And that we still exist. That's one interpretation. Maybe there are others, okay? I personally think that's a pretty well-grounded interpretation. The second thing is there was, in the United States in particular, although Britain was way ahead of the United States with this, there began to be an anti-apartheid movement in this country. On college campuses, even in DC, there was a formation in 1978 of an organization called Trends Africa, headed by Randall Robinson. And he was very active in promoting lobbying and agitating our government against demanding the U.S. play a role in putting sanctions on South Africa to put pressure to end the apartheid structure. I'm going to take a little bit of personal credit in all of this, because in 1978, I took a 1-year leave of absence from teaching from Chico and worked for the Washington Office on Africa, which was a progressive church-sponsored organization that had a mandate of following legislation in Congress related to South Africa and Zimbabwe at the time. My official designation, my salary was paid for by the Methodist Church, and my official designation was person in mission. And I guarantee you I had a mission when we were there. Well, the main project of the Washington Office on Africa, led by Ted Lockwood and Christine Root, I was just one of the soldiers there, was to push the House of Representatives to pass an amendment to the 1978 Export-Import Bank Authorization Bill. And I could go into a lot of details and explain what that does. What we had to have was somebody in Congress to champion that bill. And and Paul Tsongas, who was a member of the House at the time, later senator from Massachusetts, worked very closely with our office during this process. And throughout the entire spring of 1978, I worked with my colleagues lobbying Congress and meeting. I used to have clandestine meetings with members of the State Department where we would change ideas and information. It was quite dramatic. It was quite exciting for me to do that. My Peg here is an old pro at all of that work. But anyway, we were actually able, through a lot of diligent work. By the way, what gave impetus for Congress to pass this amendment was the assassination of Stephen Biko, who was considered the South African Martin Luther King at the time. He was killed in prison. Obviously, the South Africans said he committed suicide, which is a bunch of bullshit. But that created a kind of a window. It didn't last very long. It was about 7 or 8, 9 months. But Congress was sensitive to this issue. And we actually got the amendment passed. It was never implemented, but we got the amendment passed. So I want to take some credit in being involved in the first sanction that the US government implemented on South Africa. It wasn't until the sanctions bills of 1985 and 1986 where there was any real meat to the sanctions against South Africa. I will tell you an additional vignette in this story. It's boring work, by the way, lobbying. It takes time, and you're at the mercy of the schedule of the various committees, subcommittees, full committees, etc. But the House Banking Committee, led by House of Representatives member Stephen Neal from Missouri, was the chair of this committee. And we were all set. We'd gotten our votes. We'd argued. We sent out our information. And we're waiting for the vote. And all of a sudden, he said, the meeting will be adjourned, okay? And it'll be postponed another 10 days or 2 weeks. So you're kind of in a lurch. So we went back to the office, discussed it, and then we got a phone call from Neil's office saying, could somebody come over and explain to him exactly what the essence of our argument was? So that was a Friday. My assignment over the weekend was to go home and to come up with a set of arguments for Stephen Neal so he could endorse and support the Export-Import Bank cutoff to South Africa. So this was what I ended up going to work on Friday. See Dick, see Jane, this is bad. Cut them. I mean, that was the mentality, folks. I'm serious, okay? And we took it, and I remember handing it to him. He looked at it and said, oh, I can understand this. I'm serious. This is a very, very true story. But anyway, I'm getting too far afield from all of this. The point I want to make is this come to Jesus moment is such that this decline that the United States is involved in. Let me say one more personal note. About a week or two before October 7th, I was thinking, this is a strange moment. The U.S. is taking some really big, serious hits right now. And it doesn't seem to be responding. What's it going to do? What were the hits? China negotiated a rapprochement mob between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Big hit for the U.S. BRICS 2 was formed.
Expansion.
And it became crystal clear that the U.S. project to create regime change, the U.S. project to use Ukrainian people to create regime change in Russia had failed, okay? The counteroffensive had failed. The whole world knew it, okay? The Biden administration knew it. And I just said, there's 3 major hits the US just took. What's gonna happen next? A week later, October 7th, October 8th, okay? Now what's happened? A lot of things has happened. One of the things, Ukraine has been taken off the media. You don't hear about Ukraine anymore. Why? Because the US lost. Now there will be more fighting for a while, but there's not gonna be a victory. Did you guys read the Time magazine article about Zelensky last week?
He's leaving.
He's leaving. Yeah, he's in trouble. I mean, he's delusional, okay? He believed that stuff, okay? He believed it. And I said, what did Henry Kissinger say? It's dangerous to be an enemy of the United States, but it's fatal to be an ally of the United States, okay? Okay, that's what he said, okay? Zelensky is another one who finally figured that out, okay? The US is in decline, and this is speeding up that decline. Let me go back to my point about South Africa. So the second is the anti-apartheid movement. The third, and this is very, very important, as early as the early 1980s, a segment of the South African ruling class, we called them the verlichte, as opposed to the verkrampte. This was language they were using at the time. These were so-called enlightened interests, capitalists, okay, who realized that things were going badly for the apartheid project. And that at some point, South Africa, if it already wasn't, was going to be a pariah in the world, okay? And that it was going to constantly be destabilized because of the violence and the protests, etc. So as early as 1982, maybe 81, a segment of the South African ruling class began to meet in various countries in West Africa with representatives of the African National Council, Congress, the ANC. And what was the agenda? What is a post-apartheid South Africa going to look like? What kind of compromise can we make to maintain a white power structure, but to dismantle apartheid as we know it? And so that was arranged in these clandestine meetings, okay? There's documentation. I've actually seen a documentary on this, so I'm not making this stuff up, okay? So a segment of the South African ruling class, circumventing the political establishment, came up with an outline or framework of how to have a post-apartheid state. So that's the third component. Is there a ruling sector in Israel that is negotiating with Hamas right now to come up with a solution? No, there isn't, okay? What's the fourth level here? And that is that the United States, who, just like the US has this power over Israel right now, I assume they do, maybe they don't. The United States, under the Reagan administration, put their finger up to test the wind, okay? Politically, if we continue to support South Africa, now back off. What was Reagan's policies towards South Africa when he came into office? Chester Crocker, constructive engagement, getting closer with the white regime, okay? We can co-opt black leaders, okay? And we can support South Africa's militarization and destabilization of the region. By 1985, the Reagan administration was speaking an entirely different language. And you see, what was the date? September 28th, 1987. Look it up. Secretary of State George Shultz gave a speech to the Business Council for International Understanding, where he called for the dismantlement of apartheid, okay? In sequence to that was the 1985 and the 1986 sanctions bill. And in 1990, Nelson Mandela, who had spent 28 years in prison. Why was he in prison? Because he was a terrorist. ANC was a terrorist organization. The South African government had designated ANC as a terrorist organization. The United States had designated ANC as a terrorist organization. But Mandela walks out of prison as the symbol of South African unity and the dismantlement of apartheid. And in 1994, he's elected president of South Africa. In 1960, 61, he's put in prison because he's a terrorist. 33 years later, he's elected president of South Africa, okay? What does that tell you about what terrorism is about, okay? Okay, now, so when you look at these ingredients related to Israel, I can't see any of them that hold true except for Hamas's attacks on October 7th as a statement of we're outraged and we're willing to be killed related to our commitment to the Palestinian cause. With those remarks, I'm going to stop, okay? I have nothing else to say.
A secret agreement that I believe was leaked to Hamas, that was in the consortium news about, they were planning to go into Gaza anyway to get the oil and gas in the water, or the Mediterranean.
Yeah, the Eastern Mediterranean, yeah. I was going to say that in the context of, if anybody asked what was Hamas's motives at that point. Yes?
Oh, okay, George, how about, those 10 questions by Ralph Nader that he feels the journalists should be asking? I would mention maybe one for sure I agree, maybe I can come up with a second. But number one, why is it that Israel, on that night, October the 7th, why was not the most surveilled with artificial intelligence and everything all around that wall? How is it that they could come in after practicing hang gliding, come out into Israel, go in, attack in nearby settlements or maybe even regular cities? And I'll see if I can say this faster than I'm doing.
You're all right.
And crack Israel military didn't come and stop them for 7 hours.
Six hours.
How the hell did that happen? I mean, it suggests something.
You know, it suggests a lot. Anybody want to comment to that? Yes, Robin?
It reminds me of the hijackers on the planes in 9/11. They were encouraged to think that they could accomplish something in jets, that they couldn't fly. I'm a 9/11 truther. Buildings fell at the speed of gravity. You know, you can't, at any rate. In my view, Israel's got a ring in our nose. Especially the Democratic Party, both parties, they want to serve AIPAC. And I think 9/11 happened to take us into the Middle East.
Yeah.
And who benefits? Israel.
Yeah, I concur with that, yeah. Anybody, yes?
I have another question related to this.
Please.
What is the hold that Israel has on us? Because they have been having quite an influence on our freedom of speech, on our elections, considering you can win or lose an election based on how AIPAC feels about you. So I'm really curious to know what it seems like that Israel and Netanyahu can speak in front of our Congress and embarrass our President Obama and so on and so forth. But basically, what is the hold that Israel has over us? It seems like they're the boss more than we are.
Anybody else want to add? I do have some comments, and I will make a few comments, but I'd like people to have the floor.
Yeah, they own everything.
Decades ago, I had a classmate that was Arab, a Christian Arab, in graduate school with me, and he was talking about that Jews and Arabs have lived together in Palestine, in what's now Israel, for centuries. And his theory was it was the cultural divide from all the Europeans and Americans coming to Israel to set up this colony, as you talked about. And that was where the conflict came, was not religion, but culture. And the same thing as you were talking about in some of the other countries. And I was surprised a little bit to read that on October 7th, there was 500,000 Americans in Israel, many to celebrate a holiday, including at least one member of our Congress. And so I wonder if that connection, that intertwine between the two cultures has something to do. Plus, I also think that the American government thinks of Israel as an outpost to control, keep an eye on Iran, keep an eye on all the other countries in the area. And the combination of those things, I wonder, is maybe that's the ring in the nose.
Yeah, one more comment, and then I'll make a few comments. Yes.
Yeah, just in regards to the ring in our nose comment and trying to get to the bottom of that, you know, there are a number of different factors, and I think it's pretty simple. And Biden said 20 years ago, which is if Israel didn't exist, we'd have to create one. We would have to create a state similar to Israel. It's an anchor point in the Middle East. They're extremely American friendly. They're extremely easy to please on the surface level to a bunch of ethno-Christians here in the United States who are more than willing to eat up whatever religious fantasy they want to believe in, and they will support us in any war we want to pursue in the Middle East. It's an extremely easy, reliable ally to have, and you know, better and easier to deal with than any Arab allies. So yeah, just maintaining an Israel in the Middle East is extremely important for American politics and American interests, and you know, American politicians know that, and it just moves a particular part of the American voting base, and they'll vote for the Israel question every single time.
Yeah. Yes.
I would like to add that we all know that technology isn't and shouldn't be the driver of humanity. Like, there's a reason why mankind is at the top of the food chain. We are the weakest, we aren't the strongest out of all the animals, but look where we are compared to the animals. We're not the strongest. That same analogy can be applied to, technology shouldn't be the main investment into military strategy to prove strength. And we've seen this before in Viet Cong, with the Viet Congs and with Afghanistan. It's just insurgents, it's just not opposing with brute force with technology, we won't win, so they play a different game. It's insurgents are the main people who were able to defeat superpowers, which is Afghanistan, Vietnam, Iraq. Well, we weren't defeated, but the U.S. didn't win. And you could say the same thing with Afghanistan and the Soviet Union as well. The Soviet Union wasn't able to conquer Afghanistan. So my main point is that men are when in certain conditions, they're pushed to amazing creative bouts. And especially Israel is known to be a technological state. And the same thing with AI.
Yeah, we need to move on now.
Yeah,
okay,
sorry.
all right, okay. I'll just make a framework of what I think, and it complements what most of you guys have said. I think there are 5 levels to the connection between Israel and the United States. And I do think that it's at best it's symbiotic. I mean, I don't think there's a distinction between the US state and Israel at all, and certainly related to foreign policy, okay? I think the first is, if you go back to the immediate post-World War period, and in some ways from Britain's point of view too, back in the right after the war and the early 1920s, is that Israel is what we used to call a sub-imperialist power in the Middle East. And the US is the imperialist power. Britain was initially. Brzezinski used to call them regional influentials, you know, to kind of put a spin on it.
Could you, I wanted to write that first.
Sub-imperialist power.
Okay, thank you.
So in many ways, Israel is a aircraft carrier in the Middle East, a very hostile Middle East. A Middle East that has oil and natural gas and is very, very important strategically. I think that the second area is related to the structure of the US military-industrial complex and the Israeli industrial complex. And I think the two are melded very close together, and that's where technology comes into play. I think related to pro-Israeli and Zionist economic interests in the United States, who fund a number of think tanks, the media sources, public relations firms, campaign firms, et cetera, and have access to media, have enormous amount of power. And I think one of the interesting things to watch is how the media covers this story. On a personal level, I mean, I'm talking about the individuals involved, the reporters and stuff. How much longer can they continue to report this narrative, watching the kind of suffering that the people in Gaza are experiencing? You know, that's going to be rather. And there's already, I mean, for example, I saw a little bit the other day where even Wolf Blitzer was stunned by an answer from one of the IDF people that he was interviewing. I mean, if Wolf Blitzer can be stunned, anybody can be stunned.
Wolf Blitzer, by the way, is a dual citizenship.
Yes, yeah.
And he used to be a fundraiser for AIPAC.
Yeah, and the third level is the role of AIPAC, the American Israeli Public Affairs Committee, which has enormous power. And that also links to campaign finance organizations. Peggy, you want to make a contribution here?
Well, I actually wrote a long paper about the influence of the campaign firms because I worked in Congress, I worked in the state level, and I watched reapportionment around the country. And it started with a guy named Grossman. The reapportionment throughout the United States, much of it is handled by operatives from AIPAC. And people get reapportioned out of their districts if you do anything that Israel doesn't like. My boss, on the night that
Who was your boss? Mention him.
Oh, Congressman Donnelly. He wouldn't vote for the increase in military aid and stuff like that. Anyway, the night that the bill for reapportionment was going through the state legislature, I got a phone call very late at night. He was in Congress then, and they said that he was getting reapportioned out of his district into what was basically an area of very white conservatives.
He was an African-American man from Los Angeles.
African-American, right.
Yeah, actually
And
Trinidad.
so he had, it was like 3 o'clock in the morning in DC, and he had to get on the phone and get his buddies in the legislature to stop it. I worked actually for a campaign for one of the big campaign firms that set up all across the country with this guy named Richard Grossman, campaign committees were dominated by Israeli and AIPAC domination. they had their office in this building that was on the top 2 floors of a building at the corner of Wilshire, and I forget the other street that was a very pricey corner, $400 a month. It was owned, it was owned by the building by the Israeli tourist agency. So you figure out.
Yeah. Any more?
No, I mean, it's just very, very powerful.
It is.
Let me finish my wrap here. The fifth level of this framework is, has to do with the settler colony brotherhood, if you will, and the linkages, the cultural linkages, political, ideological linkages as well. So I think if you want to examine that connection between Israel and the United States, there's a couple books real important. I think Norman Finkelstein's book, The Holocaust Industry, is a very, very important book to read here. And there's a book by, and Eli Pape's book, The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine, is one of the books that is very important. But James Petrus has written a book called Zionism, Foreign Policy, and the United States, I think something like that, where he documents this symbiotic structure that we're outlining. Book by James Petrus, P-E-T-R-A-S. Okay, any other comment or question? No, somebody new, yes.
Well,
Sir.
I want to say something.
Yes,
And
okay.
I'm gonna ask you to answer it.
Okay. Oh,
Okay? Speaking of money, somebody here said about the big money involved with Israel and all. Would you please tell us how the wealthy of the Western world was meeting at the beginning of this century, and the first thing that came, to set up an Israel that was going to be an island around the heartland? Well, they didn't mention that at the time. But though, will you please mention those resolutions, like the Balfour resolution,
The League of Nations mandate in 1922 is also very important here.
Okay, but would you do that, because I think those are milestones, I think that's the term I want, how we have built up through that century, how we're supposed to be #1, and we have the right to possibly have genocide of Palestinians, because we've been working towards this grand unipolar world, and these people are awfully inconvenient.
Well, we're all of us are inconvenient, to be honest with you.
Would you name off those
Yeah.
resolutions that were put out by the wealthy of the
Okay,
West?
well, there's a whole history here, and that would be a lecture in and of itself,
But
is
just the
that
titles.
history. But let me make 2 observations real quick based on what Linda's asking. I think back to your comment about Christians, Jews, and Muslims living in Palestine before the 1900 is quite apt. Is what we have to kind of remember is that Zionism is not Judaism. Zionism is not Jews, okay? Zionism is a political movement that uses Judaism and the plight of Jews as a rationale to justify the Zionist project gaining a statehood, okay? There's a very important distinction there. Now, saying that, I could be called anti-Semitic, okay? But obviously, I'm not, okay? Well, I don't know if I'm obviously not, but I'm not. So what I like to, when I think of this project, the Zionist project, which was more or less birthed in the late part of the 19th century, particularly the 1890s, by these European Jews, Theodor Herzl for one, Chaim Weizmann as another, and
Jabotinsky.
yeah, Jabotinsky.
Jabotinsky was very impressed with the Berlin Conference
84, 85.
1885, that carved up Africa.
Yeah, where the imperialist powers met in Berlin over the winter of 1985, 1984, and had a blank map of Africa, and they literally drew lines on the map and divided Africa up for the British, the French, the Germans, the Portuguese, etc. Okay? So that's kind of the template. Why don't we do it in the Middle East? Okay? We just did it in Africa. This project, Zionist project, is a European ethno-nationalist project done within the context of the age of imperialism, or the age of colonization of what we know as the Third World, okay? The British colonized a certain part, the French, etc. The Zionist movement called for the colonization of the Levant, and used, obviously, biblical history or biblical sightings as a justification for that. So by definition, imperialism, colonialism, was racist and aimed at super exploitation of the indigenous populations in the respective areas that we're talking about. So I don't see the Zionist project any different than those projects as well. Now, the difference was that the Zionist project was not a state-driven project. It was aimed at having a state, and therefore it needed a patron to support that. Now, obviously, Britain, as the imperial power, looking for the collapse and the eventual collapse of the Ottoman Empire, obviously wanted to carve up, along with the French, what we know as the Middle East. In real terms, it's Southwest Asia rather than the Middle East. That's an ethnocentric term, the Middle East. And so it was going to be convenient to support the Zionist project as a foothold in the Middle East against all of the Arabs. And we know all the duplicity that the British carried out vis-a-vis the Arab populations, Lawrence of Arabia, all of that stories, okay? It was all lies and duplicity in the first place. But the idea of helping to build a Zionist platform in the Levant, in historic Palestine, and then issuing various documents or supporting certain legislation to begin the rationalization and the actual implementation of this project. And the two most important that I'm familiar with is the Balfour Agreement, B-A-L-F-O-U-R, of 1915. Lloyd Balfour, he was the Foreign Secretary at the time of Britain, and he made this statement. Oh, look it up on Google, okay? There's tons of this stuff there, okay? I'm not making this stuff up. The Balfour Agreement basically made a commitment to the Zionist movement that it would support a Zionist project in Palestine. Any reference to the Palestinians, and whether they were Christian, Jews, or Muslims, was, the only phrase was, we have to be concerned about the rights of the non-Jewish people. That's a direct quote. There was not even an acknowledgement of Palestinians in the Balfour Agreement. It gives you the priority that Britain had related to the indigenous population. In 1922, the League of Nations, being pushed by Britain and the imperialists, gave Britain a mandate to Palestine, okay? And that created a framework for the migration of Jews from Europe largely. Keep in mind, many of them migrated to Palestine because of the restrictive immigration laws that Britain and the United States had to prevent Jews from migrating to Britain or the United States, okay? That has to be put into this story, okay? And so, you know, many of them wanted to go to the United States, but they couldn't, okay? Now, certainly when Hitler came, let's say 1920, 1930, I think 6% of Palestine were Jews, okay? But when Hitler came into power in 1933, and obviously that project, you know, what the Nazis did to Jews, you begin to see an escalation of migration to Palestine from Jews. Yes?
Well, there is one thing, if you read Ben-Gurion, who was the head of the Zionist organization during World War II, he forcefully said he did not want Holocaust survivors because he was trying to build a state and he did not want sick people coming to the area, to the Mandate of Palestine. I mean, that's a quote from Ben-Gurion. And so they didn't really want those Jews. They wanted Jews from America, they wanted Jews from other countries, but not sick people from the concentration camps.
Yeah, I think we can all, we either already have a handle of this history or the history's very, you guys want to make your spill now?
I'm just gonna walk her to the
Okay,
front.
sure,
That's
okay.
us tomorrow.
Okay.
I'll be back.
Any other comments or questions here? Yes.
I'm just, you know, I think when it comes to elections, most people vote through pocketbook. How's the economy? And I'm sure this can hurt Biden. I don't know what percentage of, you know, people from Yemen and et cetera. I'm sure
The polls
Michigan.
tonight said 26, he's behind 26%.
Yeah, so anyway, you know, those people won't vote for him, rightfully so. But when you take all the Christian fundamentalists who are much more numerous and kind of are into this whole myth of, you know, this is, this state was founded because this is the birth of Christianity. By God, we gotta keep that going, you know? And so that's the bigger group here. And, you know, so where does that leave us? I don't know, but.
Yeah, I mean, it's a factor in this story. I mean, we still don't, you know, we don't have a crystal ball yet. But what I can say is that many of these states are razor thin. And if you look at Georgia, if you look at Michigan, and several other states, just the Arab vote makes a difference for the Democrats, okay? I mean, we're talking about 12,000 votes or 20,000 votes made a difference in the 2020 election. So, you know, people, you know, a certain percentage of people sit out because of this issue. It could be a disaster for the Democratic Party, which I don't have any problems with personally. Yes?
You kind of implied early on that we're headed into World War III. Do you want to say any more on that?
Well, I think the conditions for a wider war exist. It's, I mean, both situations, Ukraine and this situation, as well as events in the South China Sea. We've got three potential hotspots, okay? The interesting thing to watch is to watch these contemporary patterns that are part of the history of imperialism and imperialist rivalry and competition occurring within a set of known parameters that if there is a spark into a global war, it is a nuclear war, okay? Meaning, in spite of the escalation on the part of the US in Ukraine, the idea was push, 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 escalate, escalate, but we want to manage it and keep it in Ukraine. We don't want it to spill out. But how, that's a very, almost impossible thing to manage, okay? So anything could spark. Related to this particular situation, And this is why Nasrullah's talk on Friday was so important, because many people were kind of waiting to hear what he was going to say. People like Scott Ritter, who I have a lot of respect for, argued that he felt that Nasrullah had to declare war against Israel because of his statements, or Hezbollah's statements about defending Palestinians. And the thought was there, if Hezbollah declared war directly against Israel, then that would possibly bring the United States more directly in, and then the US would use that as a way to attack Iran. And if Iran was brought into this, then Russia will have to come into the war, and the thing just implodes. I mean, that's a plausible scenario here, okay? And I would argue that Nasrullah is a man of peace, by the way, because of his nuanced presentation about the circumstances, but very clearly saying there is a red line here,
Yeah.
okay? There is a red line.
They are in northern Israel now.
Yes, yeah.
But what seems really frightening is it seems like what you're describing could happen really fast.
Yes, it could happen very fast, yes. There's
So we
no
should be
debate.
getting our affairs in order potentially.
Well, that would not matter. That would not matter. That would not matter. Now, the problem we face as well is we've had wars in the last 30 years. We've had Vietnam, okay? We even had the October missile crisis. The plus there is we had two leaders that were talking to one another, and two leaders who were willing to negotiate a quid pro quo to get out of the mess.
Yeah.
We don't have that anymore, okay? Putin is the devil, and we don't speak to the devil, okay? So that's a problem. The other problem, I forgot what the other problem is. It'll come to me about
There are plenty.
20 minutes later. Yes, sir.
I want to yield my time to my friend Yamo.
Yes. Yes, sure.
Yeah. I just want to say thanks for an hour of like the most validating time I've had in quite some, just my understanding of the world. To hear that back is amazing. Thank you.
You're welcome. My honor.
I can only imagine what it feels like for people who have been struggling in this for longer than I have. But just in this short time I have as like a millennial, trying to understand exactly this disaster of world affairs.
Well, for me, it started in September of 1964 when I sat in a Far East Asian history class taught by Ed DiTullio.
Oh.
And the first thing he said was the United States just got involved in a war in Southeast Asia that is illegal, immoral, and wrong.
Right.
And I'm going to explain to you why.
Sure.
So I was hooked right there, baby.
I do have a question for you.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And so I want to give a little context for that question. The reason it's been so validating for me is I'm a descendant of the Pomo Nation, the Chamorro people of Guam, Wuhan, occupied territory that has no people there have no rights, no representatives, so forth. Colonialism there.
And your country regularly votes against Israel in the General Assembly too. But
So,
not because of you, but
no, I'm here.
What country?
Yeah, this is my mom's side of the family. We're part of the Pomo Nation of Sonoma County, indigenous nation. So everything that was said about colonialism is just is really validated. But it is the prospect of what to do going forward that my question's about. I'm actually this chairperson for the Peace and Freedom Party of Butte County. I've been working in third parties since a lot of millennials jumped in on the whole Bernie Sanders campaign. Found out that Bernie Sanders wasn't quite the anti-war figure that we thought he was. On top of the fact that the Democratic Party heavily tilted the scales against us in that election. And we realized, a lot of us, not all of us, a lot of us realized that the Democratic Party essentially is not the vehicle of the working class that they suppose they are. So I've been trying to figure out ever since then what to do. I've been working with, the Peace and Freedom Party is the largest socialist party on the Valley in California. They're basically a coalition party. They work largely with the Party for Socialism and Liberation. They use Answer Coalition and so forth. Have been all part of a lot of these protests that we've been seeing around in America. And so if we know the inevitable outcome of the, you said friendly fascism of the Democrats, I understand it as social fascism, whatever, it's the moderate wing of fascism. If we know that they're imploding, and we know that we're heading for this situation, the best moves for us to make going forward in positioning ourselves to actually, as the empire weakens and crumbles and is isolated, what are your thoughts on what do we do here? Because for me, the only thing I've been able to find to do is work with my indigenous nations. We have 574 tribal governments that have laws and courts and hospitals and schools and blah, 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 blah. And that's probably the only form of counter-government that even exists in this country. But the only other thing that I've found to do is outside of that is organize for this, some sort of alternative to the Democratic Party as far as actually representing the working class, actually representing the best people beyond just token talk and so forth. And so how do we, or what do you think would be the best way for us to put ourselves in a position to actually contend for power as this empire collapses?
You're asking the $64,000 question. And I'm gonna be honest, I don't have an answer. I'm grappling for an answer 24/7, okay? I see three things that I do, or I try to do. One is I look at myself, Ray Bradbury's book, Fahrenheit 451, the fascists have taken over and they're burning books, and everybody reads a book, memorizes it before it's burned up, and so you'll keep the legacy of the literature. I kind of see that as my role, is to keep an accurate historical record in various forms. I'm not allowed, that's not the word. I don't have the opportunity to speak very often. I prefer to do that on a regular basis. I love that forum. I write a lot of stuff, some published, some sent out. So that's one role. The second role is your community, is help the children. That's number one, to cultivate them, to get them, first of all, get them away from social media and video games and have them read, okay?
Yeah.
Because reading creates imagination, and when you have imagination, you have vision, and when you have vision, you are able to create alternatives to the reality that you live in, okay? So that's, I think, very important. Health is very important, good food, all that kind of stuff. And then I think the third pole is international solidarity, which is, I think, what we're doing here, is to keep identifying our struggle, whether it's just personal or whether it's group or organizational, is that we have identity with, we're in solidarity with as well. Again, back to my initial statement or comments, I am blown away by these demonstrations that are going on all over the world. I mean, it's like flowers grew up overnight, My frustration personally is I've been involved with this Ukraine thing from way before. I mean, we go back to 214. I mean, I knew what this was all about in 214, okay? And you can't believe how many people have attacked me, you Putin lover,
Oh, yeah.
And quite seriously, I was invited. I lived in San Francisco for about 18 years, and in 2018, I was invited to give a talk at the Unitarian Church in San Francisco, which I did quite often there. And a group called the Atheist Humanists invited me to speak on the Democratic Party and stuff. And I went through, my critique of that, arguing that the Russians did not meddle in that election. Russiagate was a false scenario. The entire audience, there must have been 20, 25 people in the audience, rushed to the stage to try to beat the shit out of me because I criticize Hillary Clinton, okay? So I mean, these are serious times, but we have to maintain an awareness of what's going on and having international solidarity. I guess the point I was trying to make there, I've been wanting protests to come to end this war in Ukraine. And when you say that, people say, well, we don't want Putin to win. They have no idea who Putin is. They haven't read any of Putin's speeches. They haven't listened to the Munich security speech he gave in 2007, okay? With McCain, Lieberman, and one other joker sitting in the front row laughing at Putin when he was speaking, okay? This is serious business, and we should have ended that war from the get-go. So international solidarity is very important. So I look at those as the three poles. As for electoral alternatives, forget it. It's dead in the water.
Sure.
It is dead in the water. Okay. Maybe support people like Cornel West, just as a forum. There's no chance in hell to win, but at least to get the ideas out. Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, let him have a follow-up and then you, Lucy. Yes.
Thank you so much. Yeah, no, my participation, I totally sympathize with you because I went out of that into the Jill Stein campaign. I was a coordinator for California with Jill. She's a friend of mine.
No,
And
but,
so
yeah,
I've
we
been
can
calling-
support
Yeah,
the Greens.
well,
Yeah, there's no problem there. Yeah.
I don't anymore because I've done a lot of education, right?
Okay.
And so I understand that what Marx said about why you engage in a bourgeois democracy, a false pseudo-democracy like the United States, it isn't to win, right? The whole point that you would engage in electoral politics, as Marx said, was to maintain your independence and count your forces for the physical revolution that is inevitable to come during the collapse of this empire, right?
Well, yeah, well, I'm not preparing for the physical confrontation.
Yeah.
But I think doing those three things help to prepare for whatever happens, okay? And to stay out of credit card debt too, that's another part of it. That's another part of the, I'm serious, okay? Because if you're in debt, you are indentured and you don't have options, okay? So that's another point there.
I guess it's just the conflict's coming.
Well, it's here. No, it's already
Yeah,
here
yeah.
though. It's not coming, it's here.
Exactly.
It is here, yeah. Lucy, yeah.
I would like you to give another talk the first week
Yes.
in December. Would
I love
people
it.
like the idea?
Yes, please.
Yeah, what I'd like to talk about is how we got here. And I'd like to talk about 1991 and the US orchestrating its policies that has created the mayhem that we're in now. And the focal point of that would be the Wolfowitz Doctrine, which is commitment to not allowing a peer competitor to exist in Eurasia. I think understanding that and how that's been implemented to this moment, that's what this war in Ukraine, because the war in Ukraine's about, it's to use Ukraine. All you gotta do is read Zbigniew-Brzezinski's book, The Grand Chessboard, published in 1997. He lays out everything that's happened since 1997. He talks about Ukraine. If Ukraine can be separated from Russia, Russia will no longer be an empire. If it is attached to Russia, it will be an empire. So that helps you to understand what Ukraine's about. Ukraine is being used for three different agendas that are interrelated. One is to sever Europe from Russia, to cut off energy connections with Russia. That's what blowing up Nord Stream 1 and 2 was about, okay? The second is to use Ukraine as a way to provoke Russia to intervene, to be able to implement sanctions against Russia, to break the Russian economy, to create regime change in Russia, to install someone like Yeltsin in the 90s, and to dismantle Russia into several different political statelets, like they did Yugoslavia in the late 1990s. Once, as that is being done, The third part of it is to use the militarization of Taiwan, just like they've used Ukraine, to provoke China to act to justify increased sanctions, isolation, and possibly confrontation with China. That is the agenda, ladies and gentlemen, that we're under right now, okay? And that's why understanding the Wolfowitz doctrine is so important, okay? Yes?
Could I say, well, you may not have time for this, but I see similar dynamics now because in terms of elections and parties, but what is it, something like 42% or something like that, people say that they're independent now, which is more than, whatever, either of the other parties. But I was kind of curious because some of the dynamics right now kind of remind me a little bit of when Lincoln was elected president, and then we got a new party evolved out of some of that political chaos within the country at the time. So I wonder if that gives us any hope that.
Well, yeah, we use this analogy a lot, the 1850s and the present, the polarization, et cetera. But I think one thing has to be understood about the Republican Party being formed in the late 40s, early 50s, is that that was a business party. That was the party of the emerging industrial capitalist class, okay? And they needed a new party to challenge the entrenched Whigs and the Southern Democrats, okay? Now keep in mind the logic there on the part of the Republicans and Lincoln himself, who is clearly the greatest president the country's ever had, just because he freed the slaves, okay? But Roosevelt's number 2, but his motive, his objective was to save capitalism, okay? But the idea behind the Republican Party, they weren't in favor of black people. What they were in favor of was, they were committed to a wage-based economy. And the debate, the centerpiece was Congress, and if the Southerners had more power in Congress, they could oversee the expansion into the new territories, and new states could come in as slave states, where the business community, i.e. the Republican Party, and the abolitionists who were linked to the Republican Party were committed to free states, okay? So we don't have an enlightened capitalist class. In fact, we do not have a capitalist class that is committed to the nation development. Our capitalist class is an internationalist capitalist class that doesn't give a fuck about the United States, okay? Now, the irony of Trump, who is an independent actor taking advantage of what the Republican Party has done, and found itself tacitly linked to nationalist economic interests who have aligned with Trump as a vehicle to possibly hone in on the internationalists who control the Democratic Party and the so-called moderate wing of the Republican Party in this struggle over gaining access to the profits that come from this. So the war between the Republicans and the Democrats is really the war between international capital and a weak national capital, okay, which is being swallowed up by international capital by the men anyway, okay? So we don't have that basis as we had in the 1850s, but a lot of people have thought about that as a metaphor. The idea of getting a third party, we need, I don't know if a parliamentary system is an alternative. All you have to do is look at France or Germany, because you've got the Green Party, who is probably the most imperialist party in the whole West, okay? And they started off as, a very admirable party 30-some years ago. So I don't know if a parliamentary system is an alternative to the presidential system, but there needs to be some kind of political alternative. But as long as capital owns the electoral mechanisms, and it owns the media. Although more and more of the social media, YouTube and all that, but all that's fragmented. I mean, I spent till 2 o'clock in the morning last night listening to that YouTube and that YouTube and that YouTube and that YouTube. And they're all lone agents, you know, they're all kind of cottage industries, and all of them are getting Scott Ritter and Colonel McGregor and a handful of them speaking, you know, and they're feeling like they're making a contribution. We don't have a unified, organized apparatus, okay? And that part of that is, well, organized labor is not an answer either, yeah. Yes, yes.
I'm sorry, can we make our announcement?
Yeah, you got it. I'm gonna bail. I need a glass of wine is what I need. And,
We have pets at home.
Yeah, I'm sorry, a few of us are
yeah,
students.
let these guys do their spiel, please.
A few of us are students and we have a lot of homework due in like 2 hours, so I just wanted to make sure we give our little thing about our orgs and this weekend and how we're fundraising. So Dia can start with CPAN.
She's the brains, I'm the speaker. Anyway, yeah, my name is Dia. I'm the founder of the Chico Palestinian Advocacy Network, or CPAN for short. Shahira, she's the founder of SWANASA, and we were the ones who organized the vigil and protest on the 3rd and the 4th.
Good job.
Thank you. We want to continue that momentum. We found that there is just a kind of maybe a disconnect, and it could be a generational disconnect here in Chico between younger people who want to protest and want to do a little more advocacy. And so we're, you know, to your point earlier about social media, I think social media.
By the way, I'll speak at anything you guys want me to do.
Yeah.
Oh, awesome, yeah. Yeah, I think social media is a fantastic tool, as a side note, for younger generations to connect, because we're all here, all the younger people are here because of social media. We all met each other that way. But anyway, I digress. We are, going to be meeting at town hall meeting on Tuesday, starting at 6 o'clock. We would love if everyone was there so we can flood town hall meeting with the Palestinian issue. We'd love to have anybody there, any generation to speak, as long as we're on the same issue
I
there.
think you're talking about the city council.
City council.
City council,
Yeah.
excuse me, yes,
Okay.
town hall, city council, yeah. Two, on the 9th of this month, it's a national protest day related to Palestine, Palestine. So, you know, we're encouraging people to walk out of work. We're encouraging people to join us. We're going to be coming up with some events related to that on the 9th. Again, if you use social media, you can find us either at CPAN, which is the Chico Palestinian Advocacy Network, or SWANASA.
Swanasaadvocates.
Thank you. Yeah, you can follow us there. We're also taking in donations that are going to be going to the Red Crescent Society or ANERA. Over the last 2 days, on the 3rd and the 4th, we took in over $4,000 in donations. And we would love to take in anything that you guys would love to donate. We'll stick around a little bit later after this if any of you are interested in donating to us. But all of those funds are either going to be going directly to support people in Gaza or to help us support our mission and create more advocacy in the area.
I also just wanted to say, those of us who came through this are obviously a lot younger, and I just wanted to bring that up because for me, I came to Chico with the idea of doing a lot of things like this and organizing, and there was just no way to do that as a student on campus. There was just literally nobody who understood. It felt like the first step is getting people to kind of care. So those of us who are here as students are Chico students and Butte students, and we've met other youth, and again, through social media, that's how, through Instagram, through Facebook, through Reddit. For Thursday, we're using it to kind of gauge what time people are more free so that we can have a time of the day where more people can come. So in addition to Tuesday's meeting, we'd love if you guys could come to a little meeting afterwards too.
Yeah.
Where we're all gonna meet from those events and kind of talk about what we can do going forward. I feel like there's been 3 kind of big things that I've heard about in Chico where people have really come together, and that's been during the Trump election, so maybe not in the best way coming together protest-wise, the BLM movement, and now I think this past weekend. We just want it to be something that's regularly occurring and not just at its peak the last 2 days.
Yeah, on Saturday, we had somebody who was just maybe a little defeatist in their attitude, a little older, and said, good luck, there's nothing you guys can really do effectively. I just want to say, absolutely, we're blowing that idea out of the water. It starts with us, it starts with anybody really, but the younger generation. We are committed to solving this issue within our lifetime, and we would love your guys' support to help us get there. Yes, sir.
What and where on the 9th?
So on the 9th, it's a national day of protest, so it's gonna be across the nation. As far as where we're gonna be meeting, I think it's.
Hasn't been decided
Where
about.
and when?
So the huge issue is this weekend went really well. We didn't really expect that many people to show up. We didn't think that many people cared. We would love Thursday to go very well, but the only way it's effective in terms of the shutdown is if enough people show up. So I think we really want to have it then, but if it's not enough people, it's a lot weaker in its strength. So if people are able to commit, if you're able to commit to walking out and showing up on Thursday, I think we're gonna do it in the city plaza most likely. But the thing about the shutdown is we're supposed to be focusing on shutting down Israeli embassies and Israeli businesses. So it's a little bit tricky in Chico because where are we gonna go? San Francisco. So it's kind of just organizing around that. But if people are interested, I think we can.
If you can meet us Tuesday, we're gonna have some more details. And so that'll be after the city council meeting. And again, if you follow us on social media, do we have any email for them to?
Yeah, so if you guys are not on Facebook or Instagram.
6 p.m.?
6 p.m. is the city council meeting, and then right after that, we're gonna be going to the community center.
Okay.
I can give the address for that for anybody who doesn't know where it is. And also, if we can, I guess, get your emails, then I will be sending out a mailing list with the email for everything as it develops. The other thing that's been tricky is like, some people are here through Instagram, some through Facebook, some haven't done, so it's like, how do we all keep in contact? But yeah.
Yeah.
Make sure you sign your names and put your emails there and any other social media that you over there, and maybe put a little star by your name, so, and then, because there are people here that I know would love to connect with you and get the word out, like everything, so if you've got those, have you been able to put your name in? Already?
And we're connecting through some other people, but again, we'll stick around a little bit later after here, or at least I will, to connect with anyone who's interested, get your contact information, we'll disseminate it accordingly. But the most important thing is that we see you guys, city council on Tuesday, and then afterwards, so we can develop further, and then if for whatever reason, we get struck by lightning on Wednesday, and we can't do anything on Thursday, it's a national movement, national protest, so that means letting work know why you're not there. If you're retired, all it takes is a simple sign at City Plaza, and just say why you're out, when you're out. If enough of us get out, get the word out, keep the momentum out, that's what's important to us. Again, let's take advantage of the momentum. Yeah.